I like people a bit grounded.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm going to name drop. I was going to have lunch with Pete Townsend, who lives a long way across London. And I knew I had...
excuse me a second. We're having an earthquake.
Are you?
Oh, yeah, we are. Yeah, earthquake detected. Oh, duck and cover. It's not that bad, I don't think. Okay, sorry.
Are you serious?
All of a sudden, everything started shaking.
It was the name drop.
That's why California is the place that always has earthquakes, because everyone's name dropping here. Hello, Cleveland! Turn your speakers up to 11 because it's time for Too Much Effing Perspective, the podcast that asks musicians and entertainers to relive their most Spinal Tap moments that may not have been funny when they happened, but are hilarious in retrospect. I'm your host, Alan Keller, former lead singer of the least heralded Chicago band, The Falling Wallendas.
And I'm your co-host, Alex Hoffman, former tour manager for Radiohead and former lead singer of the least heralded Milwaukee band, The Vainglorious.
Our guest today wrote the hit 1980s song True, which has been played on the radio well over 4 million times, Spandau Ballet's Gary Kemp.
Gary tells us about the time he was hustling to get his son out the door, only to be delayed by a call from one David Bowie, how Spandau Ballet went on a bender with Duran Duran the night before the Band Aid recording session in 1984, and why he and his old friend Joe Elliott, the lead singer of Def Leppard, charted different musical paths even though they were fans of the same band.
So without further ado, let's go to the TMEP show!
It really puts perspective on things, though, doesn't it?
Not too much. There's too much
Yeah,
perspective now.
Alex, people love to categorize bands. You know, there's rock, pop, glam, garage, indie, Audi, hard rock, metal, southern, emo, punk, synth, alternative.
Yeah, well, to be frank, I believe there's only two categories, good and bad.
I totally agree. And I remember when I was asked to classify my band, Women's Liberace, I gave the response, we were Baroque muscle folk.
Kind of like when we heard from Big Thief's Buck Meek that they were called rustic loft rock.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Anyway, so Baroque muscle folk, huh? Did that describe your band's music at all?
Now, it's just a word salad. It didn't mean anything. But the funny thing was, journalists started using it in articles about us like it was a real thing.
Didn't you win the Grammy in 1990 for Best Baroque Muscle Folk Album?
Didn't have much competition, and we won it 3 years in a row. I went a bit further with the Falling Wallendas. This is how I described our band in our press kit. Quote, the Wallendas are REM on MSG, the Smiths in Therapy, Sinatra at CBGB's. And honest to God, I'll tell you, so many articles use that as if it were a real thing.
Well, you're kind of taking the piss out of the whole thing, really, aren't you?
Full bladder.
Yeah, exactly. You need a catheter for that one. Well, our guest today, Gary Kemp from Spandau Ballet, was considered part of the new romantic groups in the 1980s. That was along with Duran Duran, ABC, Adam and the Ants, Culture Club, among others.
You know, I could see how you'd lump them together from a fashion standpoint. I think Gary and Spandau Ballet actually set that at a club called the Blitz. But musically, I don't really see how those bands have that much in common.
Yeah. Okay, Alan. Let's see what Gary has to say about it. But first, a short break.
And now a musician who, along with his brother Martin, starred in the acclaimed 1990 British gangster film, The Craze, Spandau Ballet's Gary Kemp. Gary, I want to start off with your acting career instead of your music career today. You were on one of my favorite TV series ever, HBO's The Larry Sanders Show.
Yeah.
With some of my favorite actors ever, Gary Shandling, Rip Torn, and Jeffrey Tambor. Can you describe that experience for us? Because it's really exciting to me to talk with someone who has any connection to that show.
I'd already been watching the show and I really liked it. And then I get the gig to do it. And this is the difference, I think, between American TV and English TV. You turn up on that first day and you do a table read. And at the end of the table are about 10 young girls and boys all kind of whispering to each other and laughing and guffawing and coming up with ideas and notepads. And that's the writing room. And it's going on while you're doing that first table read. And I just don't think English comedy has that sort of massive writing room, because if you've got that many people who are sort of assigned to their different characters and coming up with other gags all the time, you've got to come up with a really slick show. So the first day we do the table read, and then we go into another day's rehearsal, and it's an utterly different script. My character's gone somewhere else because they've watched me and they've seen what I'm good at and how to play me. And the script by the end was almost completely different, but it still had the same guy's name at the top, the one guy who wrote it. You know? But the thing I distinctly remember is turning up and their on-screen characters were exactly like their real-life characters. The writing room had obviously watched them, seen Gary's neurosis, seen Rip's absolute rip-roaring rudeness, you know, and Hank's obsequiousness. I mean, Jeffrey. So I remember Gary was always just sitting around worrying and fretting that this was going to be a terrible episode and wasn't going to work. And I remember being next to Rip when I was in the makeup trailer, and he just told the rudest story about making some film. And this is in front of the makeup women. And, you know, he was making a film, and this girl who was undressed had to approach me, and I'm sitting in a chair, and the director kept saying, cut, cut. And I said, you know, because my penis kept coming into view as I was getting turned on. And then Jeffrey couldn't believe I was on the show, and he was almost like bowing to me. And then I remember leaving the show at the end and saying thank you. And I saw in the distance Jeffrey, you know, running towards me as I was about to get in my car, saying, it must have been such an honor to work with you, you know. But he does hate me in the show, of course, but not in real life.
For our listeners who aren't acquainted with the Larry Sanders Show, it was a sitcom in the early 1990s on HBO, starring the late, great, and beloved Gary Shandling. And his character, Larry Sanders, was a Johnny Carson-type character, a late-night talk show host. And the show dealt hilariously with, you know, all the stuff that goes on backstage and the egos and the insecurities and the pressures. And it's really one of the finest shows ever.
Yeah, so they'd shoot on video, they'd shoot the pseudo chat show, and then on film would be all the backstage and any cutaways. I'd come on the show as the band leader, you know, a bit like a sort of, is it Paul Schaefer? Am I thinking of Paul?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Verletterman. Yeah.
So I'm the band leader, and, you know, I've decided I'm wearing clogs and I've got a crystal around my neck. I mean, this is the 90s, right? But I'm cracking jokes with Larry, off the cuff jokes, and the audience love me, and that's what Hank hates, right? So he tries to get me off the show. And it's a shame because his character won, and I wished I'd stayed because I absolutely loved doing it. And of course, working with Rip as well. And Rip had been in Man Who Fell to Earth, you know. He'd worked with David Bowie.
Did he? That's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, you know, I must have at least once had a chat with him about Bowie.
That's awesome. Basically, the movie This Is Spinal Tap is about a band that's time has come and gone, and they're the last to realize it, right?
The end continues.
The movie was filmed from 82 to 84, and so that basically who they were replaced by was the MTV bands. So in a world where Spinal Tap is a real band that had a real history, it was the Spandau Ballets and the Flock of Seagulls and the Duran Durans that replaced Spinal Tap. And I'm wondering, in your heyday, did you ever play on a bill with Over the Hill Band that hadn't realized yet that their time had come and gone?
Let me tell you, I did. I do remember the first time I watched Spinal Tap, and it was with Def Leppard. And I mean, let's face it, you know, I love Joe. He's one of my good friends, Joe Elliott, and the band are too, but they were closer to Spinal Tap's vision than Spandau Ballet were, right? And I sat in Ireland and watched it with Joe. I don't think he laughed. I think he just saw it, well, you know, we do travel with cucumbers down our trousers, you know. This is what you do. But I actually have to say that I think it's sort of had the reverse effect, because don't forget that after Spinal Tap, hair metal got bigger and bigger. Bon Jovi and Van Halen and Poison and God, I mean, it just got bigger. But bands being over the hill We've always thought bands have been over the hill, and then they just keep going, don't they? I mean, now we've got great-grandparents that we're buying tickets to see, you know, I mean, Mick and Keith. That makes sense to me, you know. What's missing in music is the generation gap. Is that missing? I don't know. Maybe it isn't in rap, because my son, he'll put something on in the car, and oh my God, the bass end is so loud, the sides of my car are coming off, the parking tickets are floating in the air, you know, and the language is disgraceful and sexist. And I'm the old freaking out dad that thinking this stuff is appalling. But I remember seeing someone and really thinking their time was over. And I was in Germany. I think I was shooting a film, and I saw Canned Heat. They played in this little club, and all that was left was one very old man on guitar. He was the final last member of Canned Heat. And the rest of the band seemed to be made up of German session musicians, right? And I remember he could barely stand up, this guy. I mean, he's probably younger than I am now, but this was quite a few years ago. But he could barely stand up. And he did a guitar solo. He sang a song. And then I saw him put his guitar down and he went off stage. And I could see him through the curtains in the wings of the stage. And he had his arm up against the wall and he was going, trying to get his breath back. It was obviously time for him to leave the stage.
And it was kind of sad, right? But I also saw the Zombies right before COVID, and they were really great. There's mostly the original guys. Even Rod Argent was with them. And
No, they're great. We've had Colin and Rod both on our podcast, Rock on Tours. And my kids are teenagers, and they fell in love with them. And the Zombies have been floating around, obviously, from TikTok and from some theme music on TV. And, you know, Billie Eilish's brother. Phineas, that's his name.
Very good.
He just did a cover of one of the Zombies tracks. So we're living in a very different time where young kids will go and see an old band because they want to hear that music sung by the original artist before they die.
Yeah.
Well, on the other hand, we go to see those bands and we're somehow looking for our childhood. We're looking for their youth. And we're sort of hoping that they don't come up on the super clear 4HD screen, you know. I went to see Bruce Springsteen last summer or summer before. He was amazing, absolutely amazing. If I just got far enough back in the crowd, I could see the guy when he was in his 20s, 30s. But he was very clever because he's obviously playing songs, singing about young people. But he introduces them beautifully and he talks about his friends who have passed on and are not in the gang anymore. And so when he does sing those songs, they have a certain reverence about the past, you know, and he does that really well. But we are trying to find our youth, aren't we?
Absolutely.
I tell you, there's a film by Slade called Slade in Flame, and it's a great film. Someone has said it's the Citizen Kane of rock movies, but it came out in 1975, and it was the end of Slade's career, really. And the writer on it had never heard of Slade. He was sent out to America to tour with them. And of course, Slade never were big in America. And so they were playing to half-empty halls. So they wrote this movie about a band, and they didn't even play themselves. They played another band called Flame. The movie is called Slade in Flame. And so Noddy Holder and everyone, they've all got different characters. I mean, you guys know Slade, right?
Yeah.
So the movie is about a band who can't have success and is failing. And we went to see that movie when it came out and went, this is terrible. So Slade are admitting they've failed. They're at their end.
Cautionary tale. Yeah.
They almost manifested it in this movie. The movie got panned. I mean, it's now seen as a great piece of gritty neorealism, but it got panned and it kind of encapsulated the end of their career. But I think those bands in those days, if you end up with that sort of teeny bop crowd, which they had, and I was one of those kids, it was the first band I ever saw live. I was 13. It's really hard to get longevity after that. People, they grow up and think, well, I've grown out of you now. I've moved on. I'm now into David Bowie. So even though they were a great band, it was very hard.
Spinal Tap came out in 1984. And Gary, you mentioned that even though it was parodying metal got even bigger, kind of mid-late 80s. And then it got completely annihilated by grunge, right? Even the huge bands like Def Leppard went way into the background in the 90s and have kind of had a renaissance now where you do see Def Leppard and Bon Jovi out doing arenas together.
Joe's the same age as me, and Joe comes from the north of England. I'm from London, but we went to see all the same gigs. We bought all the same albums. We both were into glam rock. We both loved Bowie, but he went the AC/DC way, which is what I saw. I saw AC/DC. I went to that gig. He went the AC/DC way. I went the sort of Roxy Music, Bowie, that way. And it was, that was a very tribal sort of thing. Nevertheless, both of us, our benchmark for what you do when you're in a rock band was given to us, the blueprint by David Bowie and by Ziggy Stardust, especially, and by Aladdin Sane. And it was about theatre. I didn't want bands to look like my next door neighbour or look like me when I just got up. I wanted a band to look uniform and to look aspirational. So I want to be in that gang. How on earth do I do that? Where do I get those clothes? How do I make my hair look like that? How do I have that attitude? How do I walk like that? For me, grunge had none of those things. So I completely did not get it. But I understand that all music fashion is dialectic. It just changes to the opposite and flip-flops like that because you want to do something that's different to the guys who came before. The 80s were really created by people like Roxy Music and Bowie in the early 70s when we were all kids being influenced.
I'm a huge Bowie fan, but thank goodness that Bowie's career didn't start with Let's Dance in the 80s, right? Real artists, they evolve. The Beatles and Bowie, their creative journey from beginning to end is almost unbelievable, right?
Well, yeah, but it's America's fault that Bowie did Let's Dance, let's face it, because he couldn't get in the door properly with all the good stuff that he made in the 70s. Ziggy or
Sure.
Aladdin or, Station, Young Americans. I mean, even Scary Monsters. He just couldn't get into America properly. So he had to kind of make himself a little bit more conservative, a little bit more commercial. He brought in that great American producer, Nile Rodgers. This won't resonate in America, but it's a bit like the Labour Party here in England in the 70s. It was quite far to the left. And then suddenly Blair comes along and he kind of puts it more in the middle, in the sort of centre ground, and it's bigger than it's ever been before. That's not to say that the album's terrible.
No.
Let's Dance was a great record. Can I tell you what was good? I grew up with Bowie. I was at Hammersmith. I went to see him as the Marquis doing Aladdin Sane.
Oh, God.
For that NBC special.
I envy you.
I met him a bunch of times. I absolutely loved him. But I knocked him off of number one. So when True came out in the UK, we were the following number one. We knocked him off and that gave me a buzz. So I'll tell you a little Bowie story in my life when, it's not that big because, I grew up with this massive fan and then I see him backstage at Live Aid and I'm going to talk to him. And I never do. I can't go up to him. To me, he's too fragile. He's too elusive. And I do remember in 1991, I was on the roof of Le Parc Hotel in LA and I'd come over to shoot The Bodyguard. It was early in the morning because I was jet lagged and I got a tap on my shoulder. I was the only one up there and I turned around and right in front of me, like a foot away from me, was David Bowie's face, and my whole vision sort of went a bit wobbly and my knees went a bit. And we ended up having a very cool chat and he was over doing Tin Machine and we went to see him that night. But it was a thrill to meet him. And a couple of years after that, it was a Saturday morning. I'm at home in dad mode. My kid is 3 or 4 at that time. And I'm trying to get him to some kids play thing on a Saturday morning down the road in the park. And I'm getting him dressed. He's got Cocoa Pops all over him and I'm the same. And then we get out the door, get out the fucking door. Come on, we're late. And the phone rings. I grab it and I go, yes. And hi, Gary, this is David Bowie. I'm like, what? I thought someone was kidding me, but it was actually David who'd got my number. In fact, he'd got everybody's number who he wanted to invite to his art show in London. And because he wasn't an artist, he decided he would phone around individually to as many people as he could. So suddenly I'm like, oh, hi, David. Yes. My kid's walking out the door. He's only going into the road. Cars are going around him. I don't care. I'm talking to David Bowie. That's the kind of gentleman he was.
Oh, that's such a cool thing. And he was a great comedic actor, too. He started doing a lot of comedy later on.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, amazing.
With Ricky Gervais.
Yeah, with Ricky Gervais. But one more thing about obsolescence, which is kind of the inverse of this, is that we had John Langford on from the Mekons. They had a show, and it wasn't a big show. This is 76, 77, I think. And he goes, there was this guy in this opening band, and 40 people in the audience, and they're there to see us. And he just starts doing this grandstanding bullshit that we're all replacing, right?
He's talking about the stadium moves.
And he goes, he's shite. Even their manager is later saying, look at the Mekons. This is how you have to be. And that band was U2.
No way.
Yeah. So it was like one of U2's first opening performances.
Well, I remember going to do Band-Aid, going to that studio. And so the night before we did Band-Aid, Duran Duran and Spandau Ballet are doing a German television show. And it's the first time we'd really properly met. And, you know, we were big rivals in Britain. Everyone, it was you either a Durani or you were a Spandau fan, right? And we kind of wanted to prove to each other that we were also the biggest drinkers, you know. So funnily enough, our best drinker was our drummer, which, you know, no surprise there. But he got stretchered off within the first 5 minutes. He was our best player.
Oh, boy.
And Tony and Simon Le Bon are talking about having air conditioning units in their room or not having air conditioning units in their room because they're both worried about their voices. And Nick and I are talking, and Nick goes, you've got a makeup artist meeting you at the other end, haven't you? No. Why? Because it's going to be all the world's press there, you know. Oh my God, going to my manager, get a makeup artist. Whatever you do, get a makeup artist. And anyway, we fly the next morning in 2 private planes back to London to record the Band-Aid single. And we were so competitive. I remember going up to where the pilot is and saying, where are they? Where are they? Oh, they're behind us. Well, that's good. Go faster. We have to land before them. And anyway, we got to the airport. There was no makeup artist there. And there were no fans there because all the fans were at the studio waiting for all the artists to turn up. Our record company stupidly sends this great big Daimler car to pick us up in, right? You know, like the sort of thing a queen would drive around in, which made us look so unhumble when we get to do this charity record for starving Africans, you know.
Oh, boy.
But we didn't know it was the first kind of charity record, wasn't it? You know, although Sting cleverly got dropped off round the corner and walked around the block to make it look like he'd walked to work, you know.
Right.
But anyway, I remember going in there and there's all the kind of, you know, George Michael, all the people you'd think were in the room, the biggest British acts at that time, and this weird post-punk Irish band. And everyone'd say, why did Bob invite you too? They're nobody. They don't sell a record, you know. And actually, the truth was, it was his mate from Ireland. He had to invite him. But he knew that Bono had the chops, right? And of course, even when we did Live Aid the year after, U2 weren't as big as they were about to be, but them and Queen stole Live Aid. When Bono dances with the girl, he pulls her up and he dances with the girl at the front of the stage. The rest of the band, when they came off stage back to where we all were furious. Because they said, well, you know, this is a band. We're not your backing group. And it nearly split the band that day.
Wow.
You know, he was a star, and he still is a star.
But didn't Tony grab the mic first to sing?
I think, yeah, he did. He put his hand up first. Midge was saying, who's going to go first? Who's going to go first? And Tony said, yeah, I will. Even though he'd had no sleep at all. I mean, how he did that, I have no idea. Because he just kept drinking all night and went straight to the airport in the morning.
Oof.
But I do remember the 2 guys from Status Quo, Rick and Francis, who felt really out of place. They felt like they were too old to be there. Spent most of their time around the toiletry area. It's all documented on video. But they were completely smashed by the time they went out and tried to sing. And I think, as you can see in the documentary, it was a little bit embarrassing.
That is incredible. And then, of course, the Live Aid concert at Wembley in front of what? 300,000 people live and then millions worldwide, something like that. Was there another Spinal Tap moment story from the Live Aid concert that comes to mind for you?
Not really. I mean, it was just an amazing day, wasn't it? I think we all felt the power of the audience that day. There was a sense of people power about it that I don't think concerts normally have. So I haven't got really many funny stories. What was really Spinal Tap is that we thought it was the right place to do a new song. I mean, how wrong could we be? We did True, we did Only When You Leave, and we did a new song. There's a moment when we do it, you see it on TV, and suddenly people go to the bar. I don't know what we were thinking. We thought it was some kind of promotional event. We should have done something that everyone knew. And of course, we didn't do that.
Well, there's a marketing point of view that would say, let's hit them with our two biggest songs, and then let's show this global billion-person audience something new to knock their socks off, right? It's a gamble.
Like they cared. I think we were the only ones who did that. I mean, I think it was insane. I mean, Queen were the cleverest people in the stadium because they decided to make it a medley, and they did like 6 songs in 15 minutes. Do you know what? I played a guitar that night. I played this black Strat. It's right behind me. It got stolen.
Wow.
Sometime in the early 90s, and I only found it about 3 years ago. Someone sent me a picture saying, is this yours? And it was, my guitar was hanging up in a music shop in the north of England. And it said, once owned by Spandau Ballet, but not for sale.
Unbelievable.
So it was some sort of museum this guy had. And I'm like, God, that is my guitar. So my people got in touch with this bloke. And he said he'd bought it off some antique dealer down in London. So we get in touch with this antique dealer. And this antique dealer said, yeah, this guy came in who said he was a roadie of yours and you couldn't afford to pay him because you had run out of money. So you gave him this guitar in lieu of cash. Right, Anyway, the guy who had it was generous enough and I gave him what he paid for it. And after 30 years, it's returned.
That's amazing.
That is amazing.
It was the early days. I think it's like 1980. We were new romantics. We started all that thing at the Blitz Club in London. Kids dressing up. Boy George came out of there, me and Jure was down there. And a few of the older guard like Billy Idol and Phil Lynott would turn up sometimes. It was only a Tuesday night. But we were reinventing the way bands looked, right? So that was the thing. And some of this was getting out in the music press in Europe and pictures of us dressed in kilts and sashes and kind of Cossacks hats or quiffs, and clothes were really important to us and the way we looked. We made our own clothes. We had friends who made for us. We bought stuff everywhere in thrift stores and we created that new romantic look that, Duran Duran copied. No, they had their own scene, which was very similar up in Birmingham. But I remember we played in Portugal on that first tour in 1980, maybe early 81. And we played in Lisbon and there were all these new romantic kids watching us and they loving it and they're all wearing the same clothes as us. And then we fly down to Porto in the south and we're wearing just tiny shorts and flip-flops to travel in. We're just the boys on holiday, right? We're just getting on, all our gears in the cases and no cases arrive. So we go to the hotel. We've got nothing to wear on stage that night. What the fuck are we going to wear? And there were all these white sheets on all the beds and duvets. So we took all the white sheets and duvet covers off and we started tearing them up and wrapping them around ourselves and, toga, and creating headbands. And we went on stage that night wearing all the bed linen from this hotel and just all in white. I think it must have looked fucking great, but I could never see a picture of it. And people were like, wow. And then we had to go and do a TV a month later in Lisbon. So we flew back over and all the new romantics met us at the airport wearing sheets.
I love that story about Portugal. I mean, and honestly, Portugal in the 80s was like a different world, right, than what it is now.
Everywhere was a different world. When we traveled in the 80s, you go to the airport of a particular country, it would smell different. There wasn't a single shop that you recognized. There was none of the sort of homogenous global thing that we have now where it's the same stores everywhere, same fast food, coffee or whatever it might be. You'd go to Italy, it would literally smell of garlic sausage.
Beautiful.
You'd go to Germany, and I remember in the German airport, Frankfurt, was a sex shop. Like the kids could walk past, it was just there. It was called Dr. Muller's. So there was some sort of pretense of it being like, medical.
Well, Alan and I are both history buffs. In fact, he's been accepted to a graduate history program at UCL, so he's a smart guy. But in any case, Spandau, for our listeners, was a notorious German prison right outside of Berlin. And it was most known for, in the post-World War II era, holding the Nazi high command that survived, right? So Rudolf Hess was there.
Yeah.
Albert Speer did 20 years there. Admiral Donitz was there. And you were Spandau Ballet when Spandau was still an active prison. I mean, Rudolf Hess was still there.
Really? Till what year was he there?
Oh, I think he was there well into the 80s.
Wow. So I'm slightly embarrassed by this, but it is what it is. We had no idea what the fuck Spandau Ballet was or meant. We were called the Gentry, right? We'd been going to this new club, I'd written all the first albums, synthesizer, 4 on the floor. The sounds were changing. We were really influenced by people like Kraftwerk, Nina Hagen, Gina X, what Rusty Egan was playing all this new German stuff. Why? Because Bowie had been to Berlin and it validated that kind of music. So we've got our band and we think we really want to be the house band because British pop culture always has a significant club and a significant house band. If you go back a few years from us, you get the Roxy and you get punk. A few years before that, you get Middle Earth and Bowie and T-Rex. 1967, you got the UFO Club on Tottenham Court Road here around the corner from where I am now. And that's Psychedelia and Pink Floyd. It's always been that way. We wanted to be the house band of this new club movement. Here was the Blitz, Spandau Ballet. So we weren't Spandau, we were the Gentry. We do this gig to a small invited audience of trendsetters, of really cool people from London that were going here. And we do the gig and it's great, they love it. But afterwards we go to a pub and this guy says to me, Robert Elms, who's a friend of mine, he's a broadcaster now. And he said, you're great, but your name's shit. I said, really like Gentry. Don't you see it sort of as being like, we're working class kids, but we're not. We're the sort of aristocrats of the street. That's Gentry. And he said, no, shit. How about Spandau Ballet? I went, fuck, that sounds good. That's cool. That's like Cabaret Voltaire. That's got art about it. I had no idea. He said, well, it's a place in Germany and I just come back from Berlin. I've been over there hanging out. That was it. We were Spandau Ballet, and about 2 years later, someone else says to me, that's crap. He didn't just make that up. He saw that in a club. And I went, what? So I went and spoke to him. He said, yeah, it was written on a toilet wall in a club I was in. I said, really? What is it? Is it another band? He said, well, I don't know. It doesn't matter now. You've had all these hit records. It doesn't matter, right? Anyway, about 1986, I'm walking down the high street in Islington and I hear from behind me this guy shouting, hey, you stole our name. You stole our name. It's this German guy running after me saying we'd stolen his name. There's even a book out about this band whose name was stolen that one of the band members wrote. So I didn't know that it was a prison, naively. We were kids, right? We weren't history buffs.
Well, that's funny. What I read was that your friend Robert Elms, right? And so it said that he'd seen it written on a wall on a weekend trip to Berlin. It said, Rudolf Hess, all alone, dancing the Spandau Ballet.
Really? You see, myth grows on myth, right? He never said that to me. I don't even know who wrote that. Maybe that's true. I don't know.
Well, I wonder if Joy Division knew what their name was from, because that's...
Exactly. But you see, embarrassingly, there was this kind of Weimar Republic hankering after things that was slightly European, dangerous. And
well, even Bowie fell into that. He had a pretty bleak time when he was doing, I think it was Heroes, right? Or was it Lodger in Germany?
Yeah. Hey, but now we've got Tesla.
Totally. And I'm in California, so every freaking car is that.
Right.
You have a new album, This Destination. We got to ask it in this context. Any Spinal Tap moments putting your new record together?
I don't think so, but it's pretty funny, isn't it, doing a solo album and everyone wants a Spandau Ballet record. You put these records out and the record companies, you say, what are you going to do to promote my record? And they say, well, how big's your social media?
Yeah.
Can you do some Instagram? Like, you guys do it. You guys come up with the ideas. And I think now it's really up to the artist. You work for nearly a year on a record and then you put it out and you put up some social media clip and someone underneath says, this is bollocks, or Tony Hadley should be singing this. And it breaks your heart. I mean, there is positives, of course. There's been lots of positives. I've had some great reviews. But you've only got that one guy who trolls you and you wake up at 4 a.m. thinking about it.
Yeah.
He's got into you. He's got in your brain and he's living there rent free, And I think that is the issue with today. You shouldn't be reading this stuff. You know what it is? It is that guy who's playing the Enormo Dome, you think, or the one-word review. And it's everything that's going to diminish you. But I don't think other than that, it's what I do. It's how I communicate. And I make music because I need to do it myself. It's my therapy and it's what I love. And that's why we all make art, because we're trying to communicate with other people. Because when we take art, we look at it and we think, God, that's me. I'm not alone. Sorry to not be funny for a second.
No, at some point you want to look back and write something about your past. And I think you did that very eloquently on this album. You have a beautiful song, Work, about your dad. It choked me up because it made me think about my dad. My dad was a hardworking electrician, like your dad was a printer.
My father worked in a shirt and tie. The factory floor was the place he felt alive.
I think it's something that I'm drawn to now, and that the album I had out a few years ago called In Solo, there's a track called Waiting for the Band, and it was about being those kids going up to see other groups and standing in front of the stage, waiting for that. But that sense that you're constantly waiting, we're always in anticipation of something that's going to come and change our lives and be wonderful in art, But I do think that what's important is it can be autobiographical and it can be personal, but it has to be universal. That's why I've never got much time for rap artists singing about their crisis with fame, or Robbie Williams, who sang a lot about that. I think you've got to make a universal track. Do you know an artist called Richard Hawley?
Mm-mm.
So Richard's a great solo artist, and he's very successful here in the UK. He's from up north. He's from Yorkshire. And I'm quite intimidated by him because he's such a kind of powerful character and he's mysterious. He was on our podcast, and he has my number, and we occasionally text. And out of the blue one day, he calls me, and I'm in my room with my piano and my guitars. He said, "What you doing?" I said, "I'm trying to write a song, not very successful today." "What you're writing on? You're writing on a piano or you're writing on a guitar?" So I said, "I'm actually on the piano right now." "Go to the piano." So I go over to the piano. I sit there and he goes, "Right, put your hands over the piano keys." Okay. And I'm holding my phone on my shoulder and my ear, and he goes, "Close your eyes. I'm going to go now. Are you going to write a fucking brilliant song?" And I wrote the song you just mentioned. I wrote Work. I felt so terrified that if I didn't write this song, he would come to my house and beat me up. He's a lovely guy, but he's a tough guy.
You sometimes need that. Like, I hadn't recorded an album from 2000 to 2015, right? And I had a friend who's a great songwriter, Mike Stefaniak, in Milwaukee. And he goes, "I want to write an album with you." And I'm like, "I'm not writing anymore. I haven't written a chord in over a decade." And he goes, "No, I'm going to send you a snippet and you're going to take it to the next step." And he did this for a year. Every week, a new thing, a different thing. And I just couldn't do it. I just could not figure it out again. Yeah. Everything that I'd done before seemed alien to me. But eventually, I felt so lame. I have to do this. He's challenging me, and this is ridiculous already. And he got me to start writing again. And sometimes you need that kind of input, kicking the ass.
Yeah, I think I do. Because, you see, I think I write best when I'm not happy or when I'm confused. And I was going through, a few years ago, a time of anxiety, which I'd never experienced before in my life. And that may well be because of my age and the sense of mortality that happens when you get to this age and fear of all of that stuff. It might be, living through COVID and whatever it might be. The news, the goddamn scrolling, and I was drawn to my instruments. That's where I've always gone since I was 11 years old. I remember being told off by my parents. Where'd I go? I go in my bedroom, pick up my guitar and start writing. It was always my place of sanctuary and therapy, trying to work out what is going on in my life. Now it's not a midlife crisis, it's a late life crisis. I'm still I'm using it as a tool for myself, but I also like the way music can change your mood. I like hooks. It's a great feeling. It's the best feeling when you've finished writing a song at the end of that day. That's when you can have your glass of wine or whatever you need, and that's the highest you will ever feel. Because as soon as you get in the studio and you start trying to put it together, then you're full of self-doubt. Oh, this is terrible. Oh, this is great. Oh, this is terrible. And of course, when it comes out and you're talking about it like I am now, it seems so far behind you. It seems like a job done already. So as a writer, that's the bit I love the most. There's one of the songs on the album is called Borrowed Town. And I remember I wrote that entirely on a tube train. I'm going to name drop. I was going to have lunch with Pete Townsend, who lives a long way across London. And I'm thinking I'm going to have lunch with my favorite writer of all time, lyrically, my favorite writer of all time.
Sure.
And what am I fucking doing? Sitting here. So I got out my phone and I realized I had an entire story in front of me. I had people getting on and off the tube from London who don't recognize me, don't know who I am. I remember being king of the street, and I'm not now. When I was king of the street, there were old guys walking along the sidewalk that had fought in the war to give me what I was going to do. But I didn't know them. I didn't care about them. And no one cares about me now. And London is in flux. London is always changing. It's a borrowed town. And by the time I got to the end of the journey, I'd written all the lyrics for that song. That then sat around for 3 years, that song. I had no idea what melody should go on it. And then eventually I found the one and ended it up on the album.
We have one question that we ask everybody. What is your favorite scene in the movie This Is Spinal Tap?
Yeah, I think it's where they meet the guy in the hotel. You know, they're checking in, and just as God made me, sir.
Great scene.
And then, you know, they're waiting for their rooms or something. And then the superstar comes by and
Duke Fame.
And he doesn't know where he's playing. He's some in Ormo Dome somewhere, you know.
Yeah.
And there's that great line when they say, oh man, I remember when he was supporting us and they were still booing him when we were on, you know. But I think we have all been in that situation in a band where you've met up with someone who's just on a higher wave than you are. He is going to play a bigger venue than you are. And you're trying to catch up. I remember in 1986 staying in the same hotel as Bruce Springsteen and having a drink with him at the bar. He just played the cricket stadium in town. In fact, at that point, it was the biggest gig he'd ever played, you know. We were playing an arena, but it still was, you know, we were humbled by him. You try and have a bit of bravado and talk to him like you're equals. Inside, you know, you're never going to be equal.
That's so great. Well, Gary, thank you so much for this. I mean, you've been so generous sharing your stories with us, and this has been really
I enjoyed it.
A lot of fun for us. How can our listeners find out the latest on what you're working on, your socials?
I'm biggest on Instagram, probably. That's Gary J. Kemp, and a bit of TikTok, which I just started on. And I have a website, GaryKemp.com. And you can follow me and Guy Pratt, you know, Guy Pratt from Pink Floyd and David Gilmour, and plays with Nick Mason, as I do, with Source Full of Secrets.
That's a cool thing. Yeah.
And you can follow us on the Rock and Tours podcast every week, where we've had a lot of people on. I suppose we're in competition, but you don't mind me saying that, right?
No, absolutely not.
Oh, no, we are very supportive. That's wonderful.
Cool.
All right. Well, this has been great. Thank you, Gary.
Thanks, Gary, so much.
Thank you. Thank you. All the best, guys.
Listeners, I know this much is true. I really enjoyed Gary's stories, especially hearing him tell about participating in some of the seminal moments in rock and roll history, such as the Live Aid concert at Wembley Stadium, which happened 40 years ago this past July. And he's yet another Too Much Effing Perspective guest who was in David Bowie's orbit. In fact, we did a whole Quick Tap episode with people who had Bowie encounters of various kinds. And one of our very first guests, Zia McCabe, and her band, the Dandy Warhols, actually toured with Bowie as his opener. So, you know, my co-host Alan loves Bowie and loves the Beatles. And while a Bowie hang is never going to happen for Alan, R.I.P. David Bowie, I would love for him to get personal time with Paul McCartney, who just delighted us in his appearance in the Spinal Tap 2 movie. In fact, Too Much Effing Perspective also has a McCartney Quick Tap with stories about the wonderful humanity of Sir Paul. So if there is a Make-A-Wish Foundation for aging podcast hosts that could perform the miracle of connecting Alan and Paul McCartney, please reach out to us at hello@tmepshow.com. We do believe in miracles, and I want my old chum Alan to be happy. Too Much Effing Perspective is a Milwaukee Talkies original. Our editor is Gretchen Kilby. Our music composer is J.K. Harrison. Please follow us on Instagram @TMEP Show. Visit our website at tmepshow.com to sign up for our email list and find our other episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen.
Although it would be as great as having armadillos in our trousers, this podcast is not affiliated with This Is Spinal Tap, and no person or entity connected with the film has sponsored or endorsed its content. This podcast is not affiliated, sponsored, or licensed by Authorized Spinal Tap LLC or Century of Progress Productions.
Evergreen Podcast Network.